questions? There are none. So now we move to item 7, the performance exceptions report. So Peter, welcome to the table. Thank you for joining us. And do you want to start by making some comments on this report, just maybe pointing out some highlights?
Sure. Look, just a quick revisit of the purpose. It's a brief overview of performance against key organisational goals. The more complete reports around capital, finance and so forth follow later. It's meant to be the overview against critical KPIs. Essentially, there's very little change from November and December. The levels of service are on target at 85%, exactly 85%, which is the performance goal. The middle of the year, December results are very likely indicators of year end. So the odds are that that's where we're going to finish in June. Before you get to December, you can't really call it, but I'm reasonably confident in saying that that's what we'll get around year end, within 1% or 2. A little bit depends on the resident survey. So essentially, level of service delivery is similar to the last 3 months. Capital watch lists are up at 91% for which watch list projects whole of life. On major cycleways are at 92% or thereabouts. The main lift there is that 4 projects have gone green, their forecasts have gone green since last month. So that's Hornby Library, Littleton Wastewater, Linwood Pool, Hereford Street, and 2 have had their baseline moved and are now being forecast green as a result of the baseline change. So in terms of your page 22, which is the graph at the top of the page showing capital projects against their targets, that's largely behind the lift in the blue line to December. The remaining exceptions there are steady from previous months, so Curlett's flood storage, Victoria Street and so forth. The more complete report will come from Ruth Cable later in the meeting. In terms of levels of service, as I said, very, very steady. The exceptions have comments starting on page 24. Those comments are fairly thorough and consistent with previous months as well. I would ask the Chair if we're taking questions as we go or at the end.
If you finish your commentary, and then we'll move to questions.
I'll just move through the level of service comments and get to the end of the report, which shows movement of the major groups of activity over time. And as I've said, I wish I had more interesting things to report. There's very little movement on the bang for buck view, which is delivery and spend mapped together. So little structural change over previous months. I'm happy to field questions at that point.
So the little change, is that what we would expect to see at this time of year, given that we've just come through Christmas and New Year holidays, and this is a time of year where you perhaps wouldn't expect too much to be happening between the last meeting and this meeting in any case?
Well, that's correct. I mean, there's a large chunk since the last report where there hasn't actually been time on the ground for a lot of projects and work. Having said that, there was a very good conversation at the executive team the other day about the need to take stock at this point in the year and to really focus on ambers that can be rescued.
Yep.
Because once you get to March or April, it starts to get a bit late in the game to rescue things. So really it's between now and the end of February is the time to focus on those levels of service which are within a couple of % and could be got, to maybe take stock of the ones that really have missed, and there's always some that miss, but to focus on the ones that can be picked up between now and say March or April. And that initiative was well discussed and underway at ELT.
So it will be good to get some update on that, and of course you'll provide it to us the next time we look at the next iteration of this report.
For sure.
Great, thank you very much. So now let's move to questions. Yanni.
Thank you for the report. Just wanted to check, are we able to ask questions now about things like table 2 on page 22, or would you prefer we do that?
If I can answer them, because this
cool.
is at the high level report, I will, but if not, then we can defer to, to the people.
Thank you. Just through the chair. So in regards to the mains renewal, the Chilham Street brick barrel, when you read that table 2, it says the baseline delivery completion date was the 1st of June 2020. That was the previous. Approved is the 29th of October 21st, and now the forecast is the 20th of December 20. So I just wanted to understand that. That's basically saying that the new date for completion we're forecasting is the 20th, is that correct, of December 2020, and we're not going to the 29th of October 21.
That's certainly what the data says, and I see John nodding sagely in the back there, so I think that is exact. It should be taken as what it says.
So that's almost a year different to the approved. Are we able to get some sort of explanation as to why an approved date was put so far out and how it's come back so far?
I wasn't part of the governance group rationale to see the rationale for that, and I'm not sure if it's fair to put John on the spot right now to speak to it, but perhaps he can.
If it's an answer we can get quickly now, then great. If not, it might be something that needs to be circulated outside of this meeting.
And I'd just like to understand as well how that's been communicated to the community, because obviously that's quite a huge difference. And yeah, it would be good to know.
Do you want to come to the table so that we can see and hear as you speak?
The approved date that I'm seeing on CTMS is September 2020, so I'm sorry if Councillor Yanni's got information that is different from that. We're aware of the reasons for the delay from, we kind of expected it to be closer to June, but there have been good reasons for delay of that project with respect to the conditions that were encountered in the construction methodology, which they've tried various methodologies to increase production rates, but at the end of the day, we think that this is only being delayed by 6 months.
Or
Can we, yeah, it sounds as though we could use some more detailed information on this as to what's happened, how it's happened, what the implications.
We can circulate a memo to
I think that would be
councillors,
helpful.
on this. There's quite some detailed information on the watch list report.
Yeah, it sounds as
But I
though there's
think-
detail that would be helpful to us that, you know, it's going to take you some time to prepare, but if we can get that circulated to everybody, that would be great.
and the key thing is communicating to the neighbourhood who are putting up with significant disruption. So making sure that there's really clear messaging around what's happening, what the delay is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in the information that's provided, if we can get an update on the communications approach, what's happened, what's proposed to happen, how the community is going to be communicated with, and that would need to include the relevant community board, of course, as well. All right, thank you. Aaron.
Yeah, just top of page 26 on the transport, the one red cross is around cyclists and pedestrians with the target of less than 43. Surprised that wasn't 44, but if you're going to choose a nominal number, it's always good to go even. But that aside, 50 crashes. I just find this whole measure an odd one, because aren't more crashes in a way a good thing, because it means more people are cycling and walking?
I can answer the question, but it may not be a satisfactory answer. It's not actually a measure that councils choose. It's imposed by the Department of Internal Affairs. And the purpose of it is not clear from reading it. The purpose is to cause a council to measure these things so that when an incident happens, it checks its infrastructure, whether that was the cause of the crash. I mean, it leads to a lot of jokes about we haven't hurt enough people so far this year and that kind of thing.
That's where I was going.
I thought so. I mean, it's the obvious zinger, right?
Yeah, cue the laughter.
But the purpose is to say, look, if there is an incident, was the infrastructure at fault or was it operator error? Do we need to do something with the infrastructure as a result? It's meant to trigger that. But the clunky way that the central government legislation is framed just makes it look like a flat measure of crashes.
Yeah, and as a city that's, putting a lot of effort into increasing the number of cyclists and pedestrians, that number would go up. It's like when you want people to play sport, you have to expect more injuries. It's just what happens when you play sport.
Well, that's very much to do with where we as a council choose to set the target, as you say, 43, 44, whatever. But the measure is driven by central government. Its purpose is not always visible. Where we set the target probably should take into account greater usage. If there's 50% more people cycling, then you would expect the number to go up. And that's part of the discussion in framing levels of service for the LTP.
Okay, so that wouldn't change till the LTP now?
It hasn't been put up for change in this annual plan, and I can't comment on whether or not it will change in the LTP, but certainly it's been considered as part of the LTP.
Okay.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thanks. Just following up, does that mean that the actual wording of the measure is driven by the legislation, so reduce the number of reported cycling and pedestrian crashes? Because you could do that by just reducing reporting. I mean, it doesn't get the point of it clearly. Because surely that should be reduce the number of crashes.
That's
But
an
it's about
interesting
the
question.
reporting.
I
Yeah,
can't say, given that this legislation goes back 5-6 years, I can't remember how it's framed in the legislation, the wording of it. I can go back and look. The question, I think, is does it use the word reported?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because what you want to do is reduce the number of crashes by changing infrastructure if necessary when reported, kind of thing, right? It's kind
So
of, yeah.
perhaps the idea would be when this is reframed to check on the word reported, and I can't remember whether it's used, but also maybe we could frame the question in such a way that tries to explain why.
Why it's being.
I mean, it may
Why
look
we're
a bit
measuring it.
clumsy, we'll put something in brackets, but it's better than leaving
Yeah.
it flat.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Any further questions on this report? Yanni?
Thanks. Just on the page, sorry, I just can't find the page. It was around the report that we're getting on voter turnout. It's page 30. So this is around the percentage of respondents who understand how council makes decisions, and it says that the remedial action is to prepare a report on the 2019 elections for council due in February. I just wanted to understand who's been working on that report and which committee or community board or what process it's going to in terms of coming back to council and what input's been sought from elected members.
Okay. I believe it'd be John Filsell's area that would be preparing this report. I can't tell you what the methodology is because it's not due until February. But what I can do is ask John for an update on how he's approaching that, who he's speaking to, and circulate that to the councillors.
Thank you. And where the report will be reported to
Yes.
once finalised.
Because I would have thought talking to our community boards would be pretty important.
Well, that may well be the plan. I just don't know until I speak to John what he's doing.
Okay. Would it be
Get the
helpful to have a
information. Let's get the
formal resolution?
information, and if that gives rise to further questions, then we can deal with those at the time.
Well, I just wonder whether we need a formal resolution around this work. Like, again, it speaks to the question of these reports. Like, remedial action isn't a resolution for us to do anything. So I find that a bit kind of strange. If we're doing remedial action, then surely we have a recommendation as part of this report to do stuff. So we're really clear about
Yeah,
those
I mean,
things.
I think we can trust the information which is here in the report, which says that it's going to be reported in February. We've asked the question, how is that progressing? As in, can we be confident that it will be reported in February? I'm not seeing anything here that suggests that we shouldn't, but that further information that's been provided will give us that degree of confidence and also the ability to be comfortable that we're happy with the methodology and the approach. And I've also asked for that to also detail where it will be reported. I think any concern that we would have would be if that reporting deadline were missed, and I would expect if that reporting deadline were likely to be missed, we would be hearing about it before that happened anyway.
Right, okay. And just the final question was in regards to the housing, which says that a discrepancy has been identified in the original figures, which indicated a total of 350 units would have formed part of the 50 million of asset transfers rather than the 412 that are being transferred. Then it just says the matter's been investigated. Is there a reporting back on that?
So which page was this, Yanni, sorry?
This is on page 32.
Bottom of page 32.
Thank you.
Like, I'm trying to understand what are we, in terms of the investigation, is it to get those properties back? What's the...
That's a very detailed operational matter. I'd have to speak to the area concerned and come back to you. I don't know that off the top of my head.
So again, let's get some information circulated on that with the required detail.
Cheers.
Thank you. Jimmy.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question on page 28. I'm not sure, here I have two different, the measurement. One is customer satisfaction with the marine structure. The other particulars focus on the wharves, jetties, ramp for ship weight, those one. These two should be the interrelation together, am I right? You're the target, you know, the customer satisfaction 90%, but at the moment, don't know, last year only 55%. But I just want to know those the renewal maintenance, you know, facility, what kind of facility maintenance? It's only focused on wharves, jetties, or have some other facility?
I'm not quite sure I understand, Jimmy, but
If you're on page 28 and the
Yes.
29, yeah, that one.
well, the marine structures are separate from the others so that they can differentiate between people who only use those structures.
Yeah.
So they're not blurred in with parks or any of the other parks features. They actually go directly to people who are using a wharf or a jetty and say, you know, what's your findings on this thing, as opposed to the wider parks network of assets. So I'm not quite sure I follow what your question is.
Presumably, this is the wharves and jetties that form part of the schedule of marine structures. So it would be, yeah, wharves, jetties in commercial and recreational use, presumably
Correct.
all of those. So whatever's on that schedule of assets. So does that answer the question, Jimmy, in terms of what we're
because
referring
I
to
just don't
here?
know, because you last year, for instance, like the customer satisfaction, 55 only, but this year you set up 90%. But if those renewable maintenance facility you have not yet going on, probably never can achieve those target. This is my particular concern.
The target's set by the manager, and it looks ambitious, but it may have been set on the basis that they were going to do a lot of things that they thought was going to lift satisfaction. So if you're renewing the assets, you might expect a lift. It is their logic that they believe that they can achieve that.
When are we likely to get the figures for the current year? Relying on last year's figure, and obviously anticipating that this year's figure, I would imagine, is likely to be higher than last year's figure with the target the way it is. When are we likely to get an update on this particular performance measure with
April.
this year's data?
April.
Yeah. Okay.
So you'll know that what the result is in April.
All right. So that might be one to keep an eye on if you've got a concern about it. All right. Thank you. Anne.
Thanks, Peter. Just trying to understand, parks are provided, managed and maintained in a clean, tidy, safe, functional and equitable manner. And this, the comments is that this target will not be achieved, 100% compliance associated with thousands of CS. What does that actually mean? What?
Can I get a page number for this, Anne, please?
Oh, sorry.
Top of 28.
Yeah,
Thank you.
28. Yeah.
This is, parks obviously is such a big network of assets that they measure different aspects of it. In this case, one aspect of being clean, tidy, safe, functional is parking. And they're saying that they want the condition of parking to be at a high level.
Okay.
And they don't think it will meet that target.
Right.
So there's actually a raft of other parks measures, as you'd understand, around turfs and sports fields and marking
Right.
and litter and mowing and mulching and so forth. Parking is just one of them.
Okay.
And they're flagging that this one is unlikely to achieve.
Right. Okay. That's helpful. A more general question is about people's dissatisfaction when a subdivision is passed over to the council from a developer and is pristine sort of and people's expectations that that's going to be continued to be at that level. How, is that captured somehow in this?
Satisfaction with the
Level
with what,
of
the parkland provision or
maintenance.
maintenance?
Yes, yes,
Right. Well, we only capture the services the council provides.
yes.
So some of those subdivisions are not entirely council's, not all aspects are council's
No.
responsibility. Those that are, like for example the parks that are provided, do fall within these surveys and measures.
Right.
So, you know, is the park being maintained adequately and so forth?
Yeah.
It's all part of the contract maintenance specs, which are part of the levels of service.
Yeah. I guess what I'm asking is, do we set ourselves up for failure because we get an asset from a developer that is in pristine condition, and then residents expect that to be and this may not be a fair question for you, but I'm wondering how we capture satisfaction in that kind of context. I mean, there's always going to be dissatisfaction.
There's a balance to be struck about how many measures we have.
Yeah.
At the moment, we measure the iconic parks, you know, Botanic Gardens
Yeah.
and so forth, and the other parks networks, but we don't single out new subdivisions to see if they in particular are going on track or not.
Right.
They're simply part of the parks network.
Okay.
Now, I can feed that back to Andrew and say, look, if there's a particular concern about whether we're on top of things in new developments,
Yes.
they could look at that as part of the LTP. Ultimately, a lot of these questions come back to when the LTP process occurs, managers pitch their plan and levels of service to councillors. There's an interchange Q&A between them of are the councillors happy that we're picking up on what we need to know, and the manager responds at an expert level about what's feasible and measurable and so forth.
Right.
So that's where that conversation would
Yeah.
normally play
Yeah.
out.
So I guess it is about what's achievable and manageable and what level of service we can actually supply.
And in sometimes what data we can supply, because to do that you'd need to go out and look at those parks specifically
Yeah.
and say, are they as a category of newly developed subdivision parks, are they on track?
Okay.
And you need to be able to get the data.
So let's pick this up as a matter for the LTP.
Yeah.
Particularly when we're looking at levels of service and so on. Definitely an appropriate discussion to have there. Interesting subject to have raised. Thank you. Are there any further questions on this report? So I'm quite happy to move the recommendation that we receive the information provided in the report. Do I have a seconder? Sarah? All those in favour say aye. Oh, Yanni, yep.
I just think it's really important when we have these discussions that we record things that we've asked for. So can we just have a note around getting the memo on the Gilman Street wastewater thing,
It
please?
will be recorded, won't it?
I've got it as well.
Yeah, it's just good to have it recorded. Like,
I don't think we need to have them all recorded under the resolution, but I think we can be confident that everything that's been raised has been picked
sorry,
up
I
for
just
action.
want to raise this is like exactly what I think things like the Ombudsman report allude to is we need transparency around when we're asking for things at a governance level, and we've been given an undertaking that things will happen, that we have a clear record of it. I can't see any harm in just having a simple noting provision as part of this report that, you know, questions were asked on this and the staff have agreed to provide a memo.
Rather than add it into the resolution, can
Yeah.
we agree that when the minutes are produced, it's noted in the minutes
Yes,
that it
that's
was
simply-
agreed that those things would occur?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Correct. Thank you.
All right, so this has been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against?